Let's go Ravens! Baltimore Ravens general manager Eric DeCosta has his radar on to get the new signings for the roster right. Man, I keep thinking, if we really want to make it to the Super Bowl, we need tough, strong players. In the last few hours, a new name has been mentioned a lot behind the scenes. Will he come to the Ravens? I'll tell you everything we know. But before I continue, make sure you've already hit the like button. But only do that if you believe the Baltimore Ravens will make it to the Super Bowl. Comment like this: I believe. Go Ravens. Okay, now come with me. The rumors about DK Metcalf potentially being traded by the Ravens have Ravens fans excited. But let's be realistic. There's almost no chance the Baltimore Ravens will make an offer for him. The idea of Metcalf in purple and black, lining up alongside Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman, seems like a pipe dream. A physical freak at 6'4", he's not the best route runner, doesn't have elite hands, and isn't a contested catch monster. But is he a playmaker? Absolutely. Would he add another dimension to Lamar Jackson's offense? Absolutely. Lamar himself has been a fan of Metcalf for years. In 2022, when Metcalf was dealing with contract disputes in Seattle, Jackson even texted him to slide to Baltimore. That never happened, but it's clear there was interest from the Ravens QB1. And when you look at what Jackson has said in the past, how he's always wanted a big-bodied wide receiver, it makes you wonder, is Metcalf the guy to finally fill that void? The idea of Baltimore adding a player like Metcalf is appealing, especially when you imagine the matchup nightmares he would create. Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, and Isaiah probably give defenses enough problems already. Now throw in a guy like Metcalf, who can stretch the field and bring a physical presence, and suddenly, who does the opposing defense cover? Does your top corner get Flowers? That leaves Bateman and Metcalf. Does your second corner get Bateman? Who's dealing with Metcalf's size? Not to mention Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry are still in the backfield. Defenses would be struggling. But as exciting as it sounds, the reality is Baltimore likely won't make this move. For one, the asking price is high. Seattle reportedly wants a first-round pick and a third-round pick for Metcalf, but they won't get that. The most they'll probably get is a second-round pick and some change, especially since Metcalf has already requested a trade. When a player is being moved because of contract issues, teams usually settle for less than their ideal asking price. And speaking of contracts, that's another huge hurdle. If Baltimore were to trade for Metcalf, not only would they be giving up draft capital, but they'd also have to sign him to a new contract. That's a major commitment, and if we know anything about the Ravens, it's that they don't love spending big money on wide receivers. They shocked everyone when they signed Odell Beckham Jr. to a big one-year deal. But historically, this franchise does not invest heavily in receivers. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. While the Ravens probably won't go after Metcalf, they might have their eyes on another former Seahawks receiver, Tyler Lockett, and this actually makes a lot of sense. Lockett was just released by Seattle, meaning Baltimore wouldn't have to trade for him or give up any picks. The Ravens could sign him immediately, even before free agency officially starts, and get ahead of the market. And since Lockett is 32 years old and coming off a down year, he won't demand anywhere near the money that Metcalf would. If you look at Lockett's career numbers, his consistency is impressive. From 2019 to 2022, he had 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons. He was a deep threat, a reliable target, and a guy who could stretch the field. But last year, his production dipped. 49 catches, 600 yards, and just 2 touchdowns. It wasn't the typical Lockett season, but that's exactly the type of situation Baltimore looks for. The Ravens love signing veterans who still have something left in the tank, but won't break the bank.
And let's talk about size. The Ravens have a history of struggling with big-bodied receivers. They've tried drafting them, Miles Boykin, Clarence Moore, Tommy Streeter, but it never seems to work out. Meanwhile, their best receivers over the years have been smaller guys: Steve Smith Sr., Derek Mason, Hollywood Brown, and now Zay Flowers. Lockett fits that mold. He's 5 feet 10 inches, a savvy route runner, and still has the speed to take the top off a defense. Now, let's not forget the elephant in the room, Mark Andrews. A lot of people believe the Ravens might move on from him, and it's not just because of his contract. Yes, Andrews has a significant cap hit, and yes, he's entering the final year of his deal. But Baltimore has also seen life without him, and they managed just fine. Isaiah likely stepped up and showed he could handle a bigger role. The Ravens have a history of making tough business decisions early rather than waiting. Look at what they did with Orlando Brown Jr. Instead of letting him walk for nothing, they traded him before his contract expired. The same thing happened with Hayden Hurst. Could Andrews be next? If the Ravens believe Isaiah likely is the future, they might decide to trade Andrews now rather than waiting for a compensatory pick down the road. So, here's the big question. Do the Ravens go all in on a trade for DK Metcalf, knowing it'll cost them both picks and money? Or do they take the more realistic route and pursue Tyler Lockett, who would be a much cheaper option? And what about Mark Andrews? Should the Ravens move on from him and fully commit to Isaiah likely? Let me know what you think. Drop a comment and tell me, would you rather see the Ravens take a shot on Metcalf, or should they go after Lockett instead? And if Andrews is gone, do you trust likely to step into that TE1 role? Let's talk about it. There's no denying that DK Metcalf in a Ravens uniform would be electric. His sheer athleticism, physicality, and ability to stretch the field would add another layer to Baltimore's offense. But the financial and strategic realities make it unlikely. The Ravens have historically refused to go all in on a star wide receiver trade, even when it seemed like the missing piece to an already dominant roster. Remember when DeAndre Hopkins was available? Baltimore was in the conversation but never made the move. The same thing happened with Stephon Diggs before he landed in Buffalo. This isn't a team that likes to make splashy receiver trades, especially ones that come with a hefty price tag. That's why Tyler Lockett seems like the much more realistic option. He's a proven deep threat, a veteran leader, and someone who fits the Ravens' preference for signing experienced receivers at a discount. He wouldn't command a huge contract, and he's already a free agent, which means no draft picks would be lost in acquiring him. The Ravens have built a reputation on making smart moves rather than flashy ones, and Lockett checks all the right boxes. But here's where things get even more complicated. If the Ravens do go after Lockett, what does that mean for their current wide receiver room? Right now, Zay Flowers is the clear number one, and Rashad Bateman is still in the mix, though his production hasn't quite lived up to expectations. If Lockett joins, that's another mouth to feed in an offense that already has to distribute touches between its wide receivers, tight ends, and Derrick Henry. And we all know how much Baltimore loves to run the football. So, could bringing in another pass catcher actually create tension in the offense? We've seen this happen before. Look at how frustrated Marquise Hollywood Brown was with his role in the Ravens offense. He wanted more targets, but in a run-heavy scheme, that wasn't going to happen. Eventually, he asked for a trade, and Baltimore moved him to Arizona. Could DK Metcalf, who already has a big personality and a history of wanting his fair share of the ball, run into the same problem? It's a legitimate concern. And then there's the Mark Andrews question. If the Ravens do decide to move on from him, how much faith do they really have in Isaiah Likely? Likely has shown flashes of brilliance, stepping up when Andrews was injured, but can he be the guy over a full season? And if Baltimore parts ways with Andrews, does that free up money for another big move, possibly even at wide receiver? This brings us to an even bigger discussion about Baltimore's long-term strategy. The Ravens have been knocking on the door of a Super Bowl, but they haven't been able to break through. Last season, they had the number one seed in the AFC, home field advantage, and a dominant defense, yet they fell short in the AFC Championship game against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, it's over to you. If you were in Eric DeCosta's shoes, would you go all in for DK Metcalf, knowing the price it would take? Or would you take the safer route and sign someone like Tyler Lockett? And what about Mark Andrews? Should the Ravens move on and commit to Isaiah Likely? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's talk about it. This is going to be one of the most crucial off-seasons in recent Ravens history, and every decision they make could be the difference between another playoff disappointment or finally bringing home that third Lombardi trophy.